Today we're looking at the Lincoln Assassination. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. So today we're looking at the Lincoln Assassination, with Abraham Lincoln, of course, being the first president to be assassinated in American history. And his assassination involves such a big conspiracy that there's really no way that I can hit every detail or describe the entire aftermath, so I'm just going to try to give the basics of what happened. Friday, April 14th, 1865 was Good Friday, right before Easter Sunday, and only 5 days after Robert E. Lee had surrendered his army to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, effectively ending the Civil War. That evening, President Lincoln, along with his wife Mary Todd Lincoln, were going to attend the play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Lincoln very much enjoyed going to the theater, and he attended several plays throughout the Civil War, saying that it was really one of the few times that he could really take his mind off of the conflict. That evening, he had invited General Ulysses S. Grant and his wife Julia to attend the play with them, but Grant opted out of it to travel to New Jersey to visit relatives. Some stories suggest that Julia Grant couldn't stand being around Mary Todd, and so that's why they decided not to attend the play. So instead, a friend of Mary Todd, Clara Harris, and her fiance, Major Henry Rathbone, attended the play with the Lincolns. John Wilkes Booth was arguably one of the most famous actors of the time, but was also a strong supporter of the Confederacy and couldn't accept that they had been defeated. Booth viewed Lincoln as being a tyrant that was trying to take away Southern rights and their way of life. And for months, Booth and others had met at the boarding house of Mary Surratt in Washington, D.C., and had made plans to do something to Lincoln. Their early plans involved simply kidnapping the president, but now that Lee had surrendered, the plan turned to attempting to cut off the entire head of the government by not only killing Lincoln, but several other key leaders. Once Booth learned that Lincoln would be attending the play at Ford's Theater, a theater that he of course knew well since he was an actor, it was decided that it was the time to carry out their plot. Their plan was John Wilkes Booth would kill Lincoln at the theater. Actually, he had hoped to kill Grant as well, but of course Grant had opted out. Second, a guy named George Atzerodt would kill Vice President Andrew Johnson at the Kirkwood House Hotel in Washington. And then lastly, Lewis Powell would kill Secretary of State William Seward at his home where Seward was recovering from a carriage accident. They believed by taking out all of these key leaders at once, it would throw the government into disarray and allow the Confederacy to basically rise up again. On the evening of April 14th, Atzerodt went to the Kirkwood Hotel and lost his nerve, and instead of carrying out the mission of killing President Johnson, he instead got drunk. Powell went to the home of William Seward and forced his way into the house, attacking and stabbing several people before reaching Seward. He then stabbed Seward several times around his neck. However, Seward was wearing a metal brace around his neck because he had had a broken jaw from the carriage accident. This allowed Seward to actually survive the attack, and Powell actually fled the house without killing anyone. President Lincoln arrived at the play a little late because he had been holding meetings at the White House and didn't really truthfully want to even leave. But he had made a promise in the newspapers that he would be attending the play that night, and he didn't want to disappoint people by not showing up. And so Lincoln, along with Mary Todd and Major Rathbone and Clara Harris, took their seat in the presidential box just to the upper right-hand side of the stage. At 10 p.m., Booth entered the theater and made his way towards the box. Lincoln had only one guard with him, John Parker. Remember, this is before the Secret Service had taken on protecting the president. Parker was supposed to sit outside the box to make sure no one entered, but from where he was sitting next to the box, he couldn't see the stage, and so he had moved to another spot to be able to watch the show. So now Booth had access to the presidential box. At about 10:15 p.m., Booth entered the outer hallway of the box and barricaded the, outer door to make sure no one could get in. He then snuck into the box with Lincoln. Booth carried with him a Derringer 44 caliber one-shot pistol and a Bowie knife. Knowing the play well, Booth waited for a funny line to be said where he knew the audience would be laughing and loud, and then he placed the Derringer just mere inches from the back of Lincoln's head and pulled the trigger. The bullet entered Lincoln's head and stopped right behind his right eye. Rathbone jumped up to try to grab Booth, but Booth slashed Rathbone across his arm, severing a major artery. Actually, most of the blood in the presidential box wasn't from Lincoln, it was actually from Rathbone. Booth then leapt from the box to the stage, breaking his leg during the fall. He stopped and raised his knife above his head and yelled, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin, meaning thus always to tyrants. He then ran out the back of the theater to a waiting horse and made his escape. The audience was kind of unsure of what had just happened until Mary Todd began screaming. The theater then burst into total pandemonium as people started running and yelling for a doctor. A young doctor named Charles Leal was the first to reach Lincoln and found him slumped over in his chair, unresponsive and struggling to breathe. Soldiers then carried Lincoln across the street to the Peterson boarding house, where he was basically laid sideways across a bed because he was too tall for the bed. There, Lincoln remained unconscious. Lincoln's cabinet and other officials gathered at the house. Everyone knew that the wound was fatal, and that it then basically became a death watch waiting for him to take his last breath. And at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, Lincoln died. He was 56 years old. And although unconfirmed, several people noted Secretary of War Edwin Stanton as saying now he belongs to the ages, which is what is inscribed above Lincoln's tomb in Springfield, Illinois. In the meantime, the largest manhunt in American history was launched, searching for John Wilkes Booth. Booth was tracked down and killed 2 weeks later on April 26 at a farm in Virginia. The other conspirators were also arrested and put before a military court, and many of them were sentenced to death. The nation was thrown into a time of mourning, when they should have been basically celebrating the victory in the Civil War. Lincoln was assassinated exactly at his highest point of success, making him into an icon, and many historians argue that we have not really been able to see him clearly or his legacy since then. So, with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.